Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. Today we have a hand from a $5 buy-in kitchen table tournament. Yes, I played a $5 buy-in game at my home with my wife and some of her friends. It was their first time playing. Well, some of them was their first time playing. And here we are. So we have a straightforward player limping under the gun, another straightforward player limping from second position, and another straightforward player limping from the hijack seat. They fold around to me. I wake up with King Jack offsuit in the cutoff with 15 big blinds. So normally, versus competent players, I think this is just a very easy all-in. If we get one caller, it's not that big of a deal because there will be roughly 700 dead chips in the pot because one player is going to call our 3,000 all-in, and then the other people are going to fold. That is sort of worst case scenario is we get it all in with roughly break-even equity because King Jack's going to win maybe 40% of the time, and that's about what the pot odds dictate we need to win. So that's not so bad, and that's usually the worst case scenario versus good players. But these are not good players. These are players who don't know how to play. A lot of these players have not raised all tournament. A lot of them are, calling down with queen high because they think it's good. Some of the other players are, checking three of a kind on the river. They're just absolutely clueless players. And it's very interesting when you're playing against players who legitimately do not have a clue about what they're doing because they're going to do things that you do not expect at all. And a lot of amateurs look at this and say, wow, I can't beat these players because they don't even know what they're doing. But if you just play stronger ranges than them, often you will just crush them. That said, sometimes they get you. And this time, they got me. So I decided to go all in over these limpers like I normally would do, and I expected to get a lot of folds. Also, it's worth mentioning when I'm playing these home games that are somewhat shallow stacked versus complete amateurs, I am playing pretty snugly. And that's just because if you play overly aggressive versus players who are not going to fold very often, well, they're going to call you down with all sorts of stuff and your bluffs aren't going to work. So usually the play is to just play somewhat tight, somewhat aggressive, and just play better hands than your opponents. But at the same time, this is a ripe situation to steal when there are three limpers in front of you who almost certainly have somewhat weak ranges. So I like this all in general, but this time we see this guy has ace king, right? And he calls and I'm just out. And whenever you're in an uncommon situation, and it is very uncommon for me to be playing a $5 buy-in tournament versus players who are playing for the first time, I have to ask, did I do something wrong? And I don't know. Looking back, I think my play is still just fine because this player's not going to have ace-king very often. Notice the first two limpers folded, and I do think we're going to get folds a pretty good amount of the time, but this guy had ace-king. So knowing this guy had ace-king, clearly my assessment of him was slightly off because I did think most players, even if they are playing for the first time, can look at ace-king, think this is good, and then raise with it. But at the same time, like I just mentioned, some players don't raise with anything. So if they're not raising with anything, well, then that may sway their range a bit. So this guy's limping behind range could legitimately be maybe pocket eights or better and ace-king. And if that's the case, well, then my shove is horrible because he's not going to fold those hands to an all-in, even if he is tight and doesn't know how to play. So in general, I think this is a fine all-in, but it clearly didn't work out this time. Going back to the concept of not knowing how to play against bad players, you really just want to play a somewhat game theory optimal strategy where they are not going to be able to exploit you in any way. They're not trying to exploit you, but you just have to make sure that you don't sort of accidentally exploit yourself. So if you just play strong ranges until you have a better idea of what your opponents are doing incorrect, that's going to lead to good results for you. One other tip versus these amateur players is that whenever they do raise, given they virtually never raise, they almost always have a very, very good hand. So if they have a very, very good hand, and you don't have a very, very good hand, well, you should get out of the way. There were a few spots where I would raise with hands like ace-queen from middle position, and they would go all in for 20 big blinds. And I would just fold, and then they would show, pocket jacks are better, and then ace-king. I can't speak. Pocket jacks are better and ace-king. Pretty much every time, and, they were proud of it. Like, yep, I had it. And you have to be inclined to make big folds when they do finally show aggression after being very, very, very passive. And that goes for playing against all passive players, but particularly against very, very amateur players. So keep that in mind. That's going to be it for this episode. this video. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, definitely let me know on Twitter at Jonathan Little. And make sure you check out pokercoaching.com. I don't have very many hands on there from $5 kitchen table tournaments, but if you want to go through a bunch of quizzes about how I play in medium and high stakes tournaments, and also test yourself with monthly homework questions where we go through and analyze pretty in-depth situations, you can check that out at pokercoaching.com. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you next week.